Machiavelli thought that the problem with mercenaries, the condottieri, was that you had to keep on paying them. They were useful for a while, but when the cash ran out, well, that's when the real problems start. Is the Russian Africa Corps worth its pay? What does a 13th century Polish duke and a 21st century African leader have in common? Join me to find out on how we got here.
Despite the 2023 coup led by Yevgeny Prigozhin, the leader of the paramilitary Wagner Group, the Russian authorities are not going to abandon their private military business model developed in Africa. The model is currently being implemented by the African Corps, since it still translates into financial benefits as well as substantial political influence. The group is gradually increasing its control over troops previously operating within the Wagner Group, with a particular focus on Mali, Libya and the Central African Republic. Additionally, it has initiated completely new operations, for instance in Burkina Faso and Niger, while also potentially expanding into countries such as Chad and other. Experts point out that the decision to allocate significant reserves of manpower and equipment in order to develop military activity in Africa would not have been taken if the Russian leadership felt insecure on the Ukrainian front. The evolution of the Wagner Group into the African Corps centralized its structure under the supervision of formal military and intelligence apparatus, and staffing it with a new command carried a risk of introducing inefficiency. However, the initial activities of the African Corps demonstrate that it has retained the ability to flexibly capitalize on emerging capabilities. While the influence of the Corps is growing, its impact should not be overestimated. Its success in Mali has in turn antagonized two neighboring countries, Algeria and Mauritania, which will make it difficult, if not impossible, to implement some of Moscow's next objectives. The future of the Corps is also uncertain due to differences of interests within the Russian military and security structures. Nonetheless, Moscow continues to focus on Africa, wanting to expand its hybrid warfare capabilities.
Our guest today is Dr. Filip Bryjka of the International Security Programme at the Polish Institute of International Affairs. And today we'll be discussing his fascinating report on the Africa Corps. And this is the Russian Africa Corps, not the German one, and the ramifications of the military presence of the white mercenary in Africa today. So welcome to the programme.
Thank you for the invitation.
So, I suppose this is what the first question, why the name Africa Corps? In the West it's associated with the Germans in the North African campaign. Who chose this and why? Was this specifically chosen to be closer to the Germans, or what was the philosophy behind the actual nomenclature?
We don't have any confirmation who is the creator of the name, but neo-Nazi links are pretty clear, and the message idea that Russia sends to us is pretty clear, I think. It's also very similar to the origin of Wagner Group, a name of the Russian mercenaries, and Africa Corps is not entirely new project. It's rather a continuation of African operations led by Yevgeny Prigozhin's people, mercenaries, in the past.
So they just changed the name?
Not only, it's some kind of rebranding, I would say, but also significant changes in, especially in the field of operational control. Now, Africa Corps is directly subordinated to Ministry of Defense and military intelligence, and other sectors, like the economic one, is rather supervised by the SVR, foreign intelligence, and the information sphere was assigned to FSB officer Artyom Kureyev, who is the chief editor of African Initiative, which is the main propaganda channel used for African influence operation in Africa.
We see it as we see the rise of the private military companies in Africa and other nations, Blackwater or Executive Outcomes. Is the Africa Corps more closely associated with its government than its Western equivalent?
Yeah, I think the main difference between Western PMCs or PSCs and Russian peer entities is that the Russian PMCs are not private. We could say that they are semi-private because they are co-financed by Russian oligarchs, but they receive a huge funding from the public budget, especially the defense budget, as was proved even after Prigozhin's mutiny, that Vladimir Putin confessed that a vast majority of the budget of Wagner Group activities across Ukraine was paid by from defense budget. So the links between state and Russian military companies does not allow us to say that they are private entities orientated to receive benefits, economic benefits. They're rather a tool of Russian foreign policy with so-called plausible deniability. So the ability that Russian state institution can deny that they have any links with the military group which fulfills its tasks and goals, but the changes...
everybody knows that they are.
Yeah, yes. It was very ineffective and not credible at all. But still, in some Western countries, leaders for years were confused. They didn't see the Wagner Group as a part of Russian state, but were skeptical. It had to be proved to them that the ties between Russian state intelligence services and Wagner Group are obvious.
So can you tell us a bit about the recruitment, the personnel, and the numbers involved? Do they fight in Africa primarily, or are they a worldwide organization? Could you tell us something about the character of the Africa Corps?
So, speaking about Africa Corps, this is a part of previous Wagner Group, which continues its operations across Africa in Mali, Libya, and Central African Republic. But also recently, in the beginning of this year, Africa Corps, as a new entity, initiated new missions in Burkina Faso and Niger, and declared number of troops, operators, mercenaries, let's call them like this way, is 20,000. But it's highly unlikely that Russians will be able to achieve it because they need manpower to fulfill shortages on the Ukrainian front line. And according to our assessment, currently the number of Africa Corps is approximately 6,000 of people. The largest contingent is in Mali, around 2,000 of people. Then in Central African Republic, it's approximately 1,600 people. Recently, we observe, actually our French colleagues observed a huge income of people from military and military intelligence to Libya. The contingent now reached 1,800 people. And Niger and Burkina Faso so far are very limited, like just 100 personnel, but there are declarations that this contingent will be enlarged.
And are these Russian nationals, or can anybody who's been to the French Foreign Legion?
They are rather Russians, but what's interesting phenomenon that for years even in Wagner Group was also creating so-called black Wagnerians, so the local people from local tribes that were trained by Wagner instructors and becoming a part of the Wagner structures in the region.
What strikes me about is it a return of the white mercenary to Africa? When I was younger, I remember white mercenaries running around in Angola. Earlier on, there were the white mercenaries in the Congo civil wars, and they were seen as the symbol of Western oppression and colonialism. And now, when you see some of the greetings parades that they have in West Africa, they're regarded now as a symbol of liberation. It seems to me a very paradoxical thing.
Indeed, it's a paradox because the main slogans that Russia is waving in Africa is that Russian troops came there to support local authorities, to get rid of the Western influence. The post-colonial sentiments in Africa are still pretty strong, and Russians are pretty successful in doing so if we take into account the fact that French troops in Mali were removed, withdraw, the same as from Niger, French and American. But the fact is that Russian mercenaries in Africa, they are not part of the solution of the local problems, but rather source of deterioration of situation.
Well, quite. I mean, going back even further into history, especially Polish history, I've got to mention Duke Konrad of Mazovia, a Polish duke who invited the Teutonic Knights to sort out his problem with the local Lithuanian pagans, and he thought, well, he'd pay them off when the job's finished, and they stayed for permanently, forever, and became Prussia. So this is the problem that all states have when you invite the mafia in, they're not going to go.
Yeah, I think that African authorities can expect some kind of blowback. I mean, the unintended consequences of the inviting Africa Corps to their countries. Of course, from their perspective, Russians provide so-called regime survival package because they help them to handle with terrorist organizations, rebel groups, and to bolster the regime, which, as I mentioned, are led mainly by military juntas. So from their perspective, it may be seen as something positive and helpful. But as you mentioned, those historical examples, I would say that Russians are trying to neocolonialize Africa in the even worse way that Western countries did in the past. If we take into account the scale of the human rights violations committed by Wagner Group and the successors of African Corps, because it's worth to mention that over a half of the personnel of Africa Corps are people from former Wagner Group. So in some cases, like Central African Republic, the structures, the people are almost the same. We observed slight but important changes, especially the deployment of SVR officer Denis Pavlov, who is responsible for cooperation between Russian mercenaries and local security forces.
I mean, do the local intelligentsia or local elites have an awareness that what the ramifications are for inviting these Russians in, or is the anti-Western sentiment so great that they're so grateful to get any shred of the French presence out of these countries, the former colonies?
I think that Russians have a very good ground because of this anti-colonial resentment, which is still very high, and they can easily convince local people that their presence is as some kind of new chapter in history or something. They also invest a lot into propaganda material, starting from cartoons to films, action films like Tourist, for example, which explain how helpful Russian troops were in countering terrorist activities.
Do they focus, or does the Africa Corps focus on this new post-neocolonial way, or do they harken back to some of their Soviet history? I mean, the Soviet Union had a great presence in Africa, military presence in Africa, offering a vision of a communist world, for example, as a liberating force. Or did they keep that quiet?
I think that beside the geopolitical ideology that they want to promote, the more important is Russian pragmatic interest, and especially the willingness to regain the position of Soviet Union in Africa. And one of the priorities, except of course economic-oriented activities like exploitation of natural resources, especially gold, diamonds, timber, and oil, the priority for Russia is to possess a permanent military maritime base in Libya and Sudan.
Yes.
We also hear for a while rumors that a permanent military base in Central African Republic is on the table. So yeah, definitely Russia wants to restore its military position in Africa, but they are doing it in a slightly different way because during the Soviet times, Russians mainly provided arms supplies and humanitarian aid without looking for political and military benefits, but the new model is less, I would say, idealistic, but rather pragmatic, and they are orientated to receive also financial benefits from its presence.
A final short question to you: what should the West's response be? Should it be military? Can we hire our own mercenaries to fight the Russians in Africa, like executive outcomes, very successful in Angola and in northern Nigeria?
I'm not sure.
Or is the image of the Western, the mercenaries, so besmirched that it's impossible now to do this?
The first thing that the Western countries should do is to be more successful, effective in imposing sanctions on economic entities affiliated to Africa Corps or former Wagner Group, because there is no coordination between EU, United States, Japan and other G7 countries. So the same entities are on a sanction list of different on different sanction lists, but there is no coordination.
Okay.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we could also we are supposed to contain the expansion of Russian presence across the continent. So try to be more proactive in preventing the further deployments of Russian mercenaries to Chad, which seems to be very fragile and ground, and the Russians are really interested in to expand its influence.
Unfortunately, we have to leave our discussion there, but thank you, Dr. Bryjka, for coming out to our programme.
Thank you very much.
So do join us again next time for How We Got Here.